A German U-boat captain sank a ship, then surfaced and spent 4 days rescuing the people he had just put in the water. It is just after 10 at night on the 12th of September, 1942, 200 miles off Ascension Island in the South Atlantic. Werner Hartenstein has been tracking a large blacked-out steamer for hours. He fires 2 torpedoes, both hit, and he closes in to do what U-boat commanders did next: identify the ship, note the tonnage, and leave. Then his crew, standing on the deck in the dark, start hearing the voices in the water. They are not shouting in English. They are shouting in Italian. There are more than 2,000 people in that water, and roughly 1,800 of them are Italian prisoners of war, nominally Germany's own allies, who had been locked in the holds of a British troopship. Hartenstein had just torpedoed, in a single attack, more Italians than any Allied action of the war. What he did in the next 96 hours broke every operational rule he had, and it ended with an American aircraft dropping bombs on his submarine, while survivors were sitting on its deck, and a Red Cross flag was spread across its gun platform. Both of those things are true, and neither of the men who made them happen was doing anything he considered dishonorable. Start with the ship, because what she was carrying is the whole engine of this story. RMS Laconia was a Cunard liner, 20,000 tons, built in 1921 for the Atlantic passenger trade and requisitioned as a troopship. In September 1942, she was steaming from Suez to Britain by way of Cape Town, and she was armed, which under the rules of the time made her a legitimate target. She was also, by September 1942, an old ship doing a job she was never built for. Cunard liners of that generation were designed to carry a few hundred passengers in comfort across the North Atlantic. The Laconia was carrying 5 times that number, most of them below the waterline, in a hull with the compartmentation standards of 1921. When 2 torpedoes hit her starboard side, the question was never whether she would sink. It was how many minutes there would be. On board were about 2,700 people, and the manifest is why nothing about that night was simple. 463 crew, 286 British service personnel, including Army nurses, at least 87 civilian women and children, 103 Polish soldiers acting as guards, and 1,809 Italian prisoners of war taken in North Africa, held below decks behind locked gates. Find it on the map. This is empty ocean, the middle of the South Atlantic, roughly halfway between Brazil and West Africa, with the nearest land a British-held speck called Ascension Island, which by 1942 had something on it that mattered a great deal, and that almost nobody was supposed to know about. Ascension had been turned into an American air base. Wide Awake Field was a secret staging post for aircraft flying the long southern route to North Africa, and everything about it, its existence, its garrison, its aircraft, was treated as classified. Hold on to that. It explains a decision that otherwise looks indefensible. And a word about the war those men were actually fighting, because it is easy to forget how the Atlantic worked in 1942. This was the worst year of the U-boat campaign. Merchant crews died in the thousands. U-boat crews died at a rate that would eventually reach 3 out of every 4 men. The convention on both sides was blunt. You sank the ship, you noted the position, and you left. Stopping was how submarines got killed. So consider what Hartenstein was looking at around 11 at night, with the Laconia gone and the sea full of people. His orders and his training both said leave. The nearest Allied base was 200 miles away and had aircraft. He had a crew of about 50 in a hull built for 50. And the water in front of him held 2,000 people, most of them prisoners, some of them women and children, and a large number of them nominally his own side. He surfaced and started pulling people out. Within a few hours, he had nearly 200 survivors on, and inside a submarine designed for a quarter of that, and he was towing lifeboats behind him. He put the women and children in his own officers' bunks. His crew gave up their food, their water, and their space, and for the next 4 days a German submarine on a war patrol functioned as a rescue ship. Look at that photograph again, because it is the single most extraordinary image in this story, and it is real. That is UMS 156, 4 days after she torpedoed the Laconia. The deck is packed with survivors. There are lifeboats alongside. The men in the water are being pulled up onto the hull of the submarine that sank them. Then he did the thing that no U-boat commander was supposed to do. At 6 in the morning on the 13th, Hartenstein broadcast a message in the clear, uncoded, in English, on an open frequency any Allied station could read, offering a truce. If any ship will assist the shipwrecked Laconia crew, he said, I will not attack her, providing I am not being attacked by ship or air force. Understand what that broadcast cost him. An uncoded transmission from a submarine is a direction-finding fix. He had just told every Allied listening station in the Atlantic roughly where he was, and invited them to come. He also told his own headquarters what he was doing, which was not a small thing either. Berlin's answer was not what you might expect. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commanding the U-boat arm, did not order him to abandon the survivors. He ordered other submarines to help. UMS 506 and UMS 507 diverted to the position, along with the Italian submarine Comandante Capellini, and asked Vichy French warships in West Africa to come out and take the survivors off. Between them, the submarines eventually had over 600 people aboard. By the morning of the 16th of September, UMS 156 was on the surface in broad daylight, moving slowly, with about 200 survivors on her deck and inside her, 4 lifeboats in tow, and a large Red Cross flag spread across the forward gun platform where it could be seen from the air. That is the picture. Now bring in the aeroplane. A B-24 Liberator of the United States Army Air Forces, flying from Ascension, found them. The pilot, Lieutenant James Harden, circled and reported what he was seeing. A surfaced submarine, towing lifeboats, displaying a Red Cross flag and signaling him in English by lamp asking for help. He asked his base what to do. The answer came from the senior officer on Ascension, Captain Robert Richardson. He ordered the aircraft to attack, and before you decide what you think about that, here is what was actually in front of him. He had a secret air base whose existence was the reason his island mattered. He had a confirmed enemy submarine on the surface within striking distance of it. He had no way to verify anything about a Red Cross flag flown by a U-boat, and no rule that told him such a flag conferred protection on a warship. He had convoys in the area, and he had a submarine that had, 4 days earlier, sunk a British ship. At 12:32 in the afternoon, Harden attacked with bombs and depth charges. One fell among the lifeboats. Hartenstein cut the tows, put the survivors on his deck into the water, and dived, which was the only thing he could do, and which killed a large number of the people he had spent 4 days saving. Estimates of the dead from that attack run to several dozen. One British survivor, A nurse named Doris Hawkins recorded that of about 50 civilians in her group, 6 besides herself reached a lifeboat. Harden's crew were decorated for sinking a submarine. They had not sunk one. UMNS 156 survived that day. What the bombs destroyed was 2 lifeboats full of shipwrecked civilians and prisoners of war. The next day, the same aircraft attacked UMNS 506, which was also loaded with survivors, and missed. The Vichy French ships eventually arrived and took several hundred people off the submarines. Small groups in lifeboats sailed on. One boat made the African coast after 27 days at sea, with 4 people alive out of the 68 who had started in it. Now count it, because the arithmetic of this one is unusually ugly. Of roughly 2,700 people aboard the Laconia, somewhere between 976 and 1,083 were saved. The dead numbered about 1,650 to 1,750. Of those, around 1,400 were Italian prisoners of war, men who died in the holds of a British ship, sunk by a German torpedo, in a war their own country was fighting on Germany's side. The rescue itself is why anyone was saved at all. Between them, 4 submarines and 3 French warships pulled roughly 1,000 people out of the South Atlantic, and the reason those submarines were there was that the man who sank the ship refused to leave. It is also true that if he had never fired, none of them would have needed rescuing. Both halves of that sentence belong in the story. And then came the consequence that outlived everyone involved. On the 17th of September, 1942, the day after the bombing, Dönitz issued the order that the war remembers this incident by. No attempt of any kind must be made at rescuing members of ships sunk. Do not pick up survivors. It became known as the Laconia Order. It is worth being precise about what that order did and did not say, because it has been quoted carelessly for 80 years. It did not order U-boat crews to kill survivors. It ordered them not to stop for them. The practical effect was the same for a great many people in the water, and it removed from the Atlantic the last thin convention that a sinking might be followed by a rescue. 4 years later, at Nuremberg, the prosecution put the Laconia Order in front of the tribunal as evidence that Dönitz had ordered the murder of shipwrecked men. And then the case did something almost nobody expected. The defense explained where the order had come from. A German rescue operation, conducted openly under Red Cross flags, bombed by an American aircraft. It is worth pausing on how unusual that moment was. A German admiral was being tried for a crime against the laws of the sea, and the document proving the charge turned out to have been written in direct response to an Allied attack on an Allied rescue. Neither side came out of that exchange looking the way it wanted to. The court simply had the facts put in front of it, which is more than most of this incident got for the following 50 years. The defense then went further and asked the United States Navy directly how it had conducted its own submarine war. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz answered in writing, "American submarines in the Pacific had waged unrestricted warfare from the first day, and did not as a rule stop to rescue survivors either. For the same reason, it got submarines killed." The tribunal convicted Dönitz on other counts. On this one, it declined to sentence him. Werner Hartenstein did not live to see any of it. UMNS 156 was sunk east of Barbados on the 8th of March, 1943, by an American aircraft with all hands. He was 35. There is a memorial to him in his hometown in Saxony. And Allied survivors of the Laconia were among the people who campaigned for it. Robert Richardson, who gave the order to attack, had a long and successful career in the United States Air Force and retired as a brigadier general. He was asked about the Laconia for the rest of his life, and his answer never really changed. He had a secret base to protect, a submarine in front of him, and no way to confirm a flag. He said he would give the same order again. James Harden, the pilot, flew the mission he was ordered to fly. Doris Hawkins, the nurse, published an account of the sinking in 1943 that is still the clearest first-hand record of it. The Italian dead have no memorial anywhere near the scale of their number, and for decades the incident was barely mentioned in Italy at all. So here is the question this one leaves, and it is harder than the usual one. Hartenstein broke his orders to save 2,000 strangers, and by breaking them, he put his own crew at the mercy of anyone who chose not to believe him. Richardson followed his duty exactly as he understood it, and in doing so killed dozens of shipwrecked civilians and prisoners. Neither man was a monster and neither was a hero, and the order that came out of it made the Atlantic worse for everybody. If the flag on that submarine had been yours to judge from the air with a secret base behind you, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments and subscribe. Every battle comes down to one moment. The last salvo.